Want to fight corruption? Start by jailing 3 of your friends. You definitely know why, and so do they. Need economic growth? Then it's better to trade with neighbors rather than wage war. How to succeed when resources are scarce? You must work hard and rely solely on yourself. All these wisdoms were born in a small country that just 15 years ago was considered an artificial creation, without its own people, natural resources, and surrounded by unfriendly neighbors. No one believed in Singapore's future, except Singapore itself. Here, corruption would be defeated, the world's large companies would come to the business, and its citizens would become wealthier, more educated, and live better lives each year. Here, the economic miracle of one of the Asian tigers would occur. However, there were a few buts, as journalists didn't just call Singapore as a Disneyland with a death penalty for no reason. This is Singapore at the moment of its independence, a typical Asian picture of slums and poverty. Why? Because Singapore in essence had nothing, neither natural resources like oil and gas that could be sold steadily, nor a territory of significant size. The state didn't even match up to any large city. Moreover, it lacked the basics, fresh water and even food. Therefore, people lived there in poverty. To understand, the GDP per capita is essentially the main indicator of any economic success. At the time, Singapore's GDP per capita was only 400 bucks. That's slightly more than Costa Rica's and even less than Jamaica's. However, Singapore had an excellent geographic location, right on the main trade route from Europe to Asia. Essentially, that's why the British invented Singapore during the era of the East Indian Company, to make trading more convenient. And a few decades later, this place became the main support center of the British Crown in the Far East. All because the colonial authorities declared it a free port, meaning there were no duties and taxes, therefore attracting more and more traders, and through Singapore, more and more goods passed.
Swimming in it! I love to dive on it.
But after the Second World War, the British Empire finally crumbled, and its colonies gained independence. India, African countries, Malaysia, and Singapore too. Not immediately, of course. Initially, there was an idea of being a part of Malaysia, because it was hard being a small, poor, independent country with a host of problems. For example, housing, or rather pervasive slums, and unemployment rates of 10–12%, and no fresh water at all. Had to import it from Malaysia. So much for independence. And things were okay until Malaysia decided to simply push Singapore free flow. At that moment, everyone inside the country was in shock. The Prime Minister didn't hide his cheer as he broadcast to the people of Singapore this news.
I had believed in Malaysian merger and the unity of these two territories.
Those 1.5 million proud Singaporeans and the government found themselves alone with remnant of Malaysian military units on their territory, conflict with Indonesia, and ethnic issues. Because in essence, there was no unified Singaporean nations. The country's population at that time was 75% Chinese, 13% of Malays, and 8% Indians. So, Singaporeans in Singapore were hard to find. In such a situation, no one believed the country would survive and remain independent. No one except for one tiny detail: the British military base, which protected the proud Singaporeans, and also a man who would change everything. Meet Lee Kuan Yew. By the time of independence, he had already been Prime Minister for 5 years, and it was he who greeted the country's independence with tears in his eyes. He had an excellent education. He was also a graduate of the London School of Economics and Cambridge. Therefore, he negotiated British patronage, reconciled with all neighbors, and in 30 years turned Singapore from an outsider into the most prosperous country in Asia. How did he do it? Principle number 1. Root out corruption. Even a small amount of power creates an incentive for its misuse. You have probably heard that Singapore defeated corruption, though by Asian tradition they too loved to take, give, and hide bribes of any size. And the first thing Singapore did was to consider practically anything of any value as a bribe. Second, if the court sees that you live beyond your means, have an overly expensive house, cars or watches, the investigation doesn't need to prove anything. The mere fact that you have it somehow proves that you are taking bribes. Third, investigators are given broad power to check not only the official themselves, but all their surrounding, wives, children, relatives. Fourth, fines for corruption increased from the already subsistent 10,000 Singaporean dollars to a whopping 100,000. Anyone who hides information about bribes or tries to confuse the investigation gets hit with a huge fines or goes to jail. And fifth, most importantly, local officials at some point become the highest paid in the world. A minister's salary is easily up to $1 million and higher, so it simply becomes unprofitable and dangerous for them to take bribes. And of course, abolish jury trials, introduce the death penalty for serious offenses, corporal punishment for medium ones, and gigantic fines even for minor violation. So it's illegally here to get your ass canned. Look, they even sell cans for kids in store. And those legendary fines for everything. Remember, Singapore is a fine city, and all this has been preserved since the 70s. The second principle is not to ask for help, but to offer yours. In the 20th century, there is one resource everyone needs: oil. And let me remind you that Singapore has no oil. A disaster? Not at all. One after another, big respected oil companies like Shell and Esso come to the country, and not just to sell gasoline. What are they doing in Singapore if there is no oil? They are there because the local government offers very attractive conditions for opening oil refineries. Remember the excellent geographical location and the fact that Singapore has always been a free port.
Singapore's a free port, of course, so there's no duty on goods.
As a result, Singapore has become one of the largest oil refinery centers in the world. But it's not just about oil. Lee Kuan Yew writes, "We grasp at any idea that could create new jobs and give people a means of subsistence." A bright example, a small company from Norway wants to manufacture fishing hooks in Singapore. Wait. What? Where are Norway and Singapore? Eventually, several hundred new jobs are created, as well as millions of hooks of all shapes and sizes annually. But you agree, you can't build a powerful economy on hooks. You need to attract large multinational corporations. For this, Singapore creates a separate economic development board. It seeks investors worldwide and resolves any issues for those who can invest money in the country. The third principle is to invest in areas where breakthroughs are possible. In 1969, three crucial things happened for civilization. Man landed on the moon, scientists for the first time connected to remote computers, creating prototype of the future internet, and third, engineers in Silicon Valley placed the first microprocessor on the thin chip, sparking the digital revolution. But Singapore made its breakthrough exactly a year before these landmark events. In October in 1968, a delegation from Texas Instruments arrived on the island looking for a convenient and profitable place to manufacture their semiconductors. This fits perfectly into Lee Kuan Yew's strategy: new jobs. And the first microelectronics factory opens in Singapore. A year later, HP did the same, followed by General Electric. And within just a decade, as the computer boom began worldwide, Singapore became one of the largest exporters of microelectronics. At the same time, a new global financial center begins to grow here. The logic is simple. The financial world then wakes up in Zurich, at 9 a.m. banks open, then in London, and a bit later in New York. When Zurich closes, financial flows from London and New York move to San Francisco. And here's the problem. When San Francisco is closing, banks in Zurich are not yet open. So nothing happens in the financial world. And Singapore fits perfectly into this scheme. While banks in San Francisco are still open, Singapore takes baton from them. And when banks in Singapore close, they can transfer financial flows to Zurich. Thus, the circle is complete, and for the first time in history, global 24 hours banking services is launched. The fourth principle: each citizen has a stake in the country's wealth and a place in its future. One of the main problems in early Singapore is atrocious housing, slums. There are many and they are very large. To give you an idea, in 1961, a single fire destroyed an entire quarter and left 16,000 people homeless at once. And Lee Kuan Yew has a solution: to build quality social housing for people and to ensure residents are not just renters, but owners. I wanted our society to be composed of homeowners. I was convinced that if every family owned their home, it would make the country's situation more stable. As a result, over 30 years, Singapore has built 750,000 apartments under various government programs, and only 9% of them will be for rent. The rest will be house owners. The fifth principle: talented people are a country's most valuable asset. Lee Kuan Yew does everything to make Singapore an oasis for people from developed countries. Remember, Singapore's location and climate are great, but healthcare, education, security, transport and services need to be as good as, say, UK or US. To encourage entrepreneurs from there to willingly do business and invest their money in Singapore. But for this to happen, Singaporeans themselves need to match up. This means providing them with a good education and decent income. A key decision here is to focus on the English language in both business and education.
English, do you speak it?
The country simply couldn't have survived if people only communicated and learned in Chinese, Malay or Tamil. As Lee Kuan Yew said, everyone should learn English, and their native language should become their second language. Of course, it was easy for him to say, mostly speaking in English himself. Thank you to Cambridge for that. English solves two important issues for the country. First, it unites Singapore's diverse ethnic group, and second, it serves as a passport to the world of international business, diplomacy, science and technology. The country begins to fund its citizens' overseas education and internships. In return, they must come back and start working for their homeland. Additionally, Singaporean authorities implement another cool principle loved by American companies: green harvesting. This is when the most promising students from different countries are offered jobs in Singapore even before their final exams. Naturally, many like this and decide to stay. All this leads to Singapore showing the fastest GDP growth rates in Asia in the 90s, 14% per year. And now it remains a world leader in almost every possible industry with virtually endless investments. However, even so, Singapore hasn't become a paradise on earth. The higher salaries and the living standards, the higher the price. Today, Singapore is the most expensive city in the world and shares first place with Zurich. Now, let's add to this cocktail the absence of free press and journalists, a one-party system, draconian fines, low happiness levels, and power that passed down by inheritance through elections, of course. The current Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong, is the elder son of Lee Kuan Yew. For many people, this story is about profitably selling one's freedom. For others, it's a story that well-being and prosperity can only be achieved with a firm, dictatorial hand, anywhere and everywhere, as long as there is a Lee Kuan Yew. But that's not quite true. Singapore's success can't be scaled or replicated. A small territory, a small population that, although it has grown, but still totally only 5 million people. And of course, the perfect location connected the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This starting condition, along with all the policies implemented, created the very economic miracle. Singapore continues to grow both economically and literally, like Dubai, reclaiming land from the sea by creating artificial islands. We had no natural resources. We have only people living on a small piece of strategically important land. What do you think about it?
Second awesome gland. True story.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Support it with likes and share it with your friends. And of course, don't forget to click on the subscribe button and tell me in the comments what country or city would you like to see on my channel. See you soon.